Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Youngtop, and I'm a program assistant with the Spiritual Life Office here at U Chicago. And with us today, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Reverend Angie Buchanan, and I am the spiritual advisor at the University of Chicago for Pagan Students.
And we're so happy to have Angie here. Wherever you are, whether you're just listening to us like a very chill podcast while you're doing your much needed dishes and chores, um, or looking at our beautiful faces, we're so glad to have you. And we hope you're able to glean something helpful from our little conversation today. So, this series, I Wonder as I Wander, is specifically for those young people out there who are going through a lot of spiritual change right now, especially if it's their first year as an independent adult. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure and a lot of confusion associated with change, especially for young people. So if you grew up in a household that had a very strong faith background and now you're starting to feel disillusioned with it, really any changes in your spiritual life at all, this series is meant to reassure you that any sense of doubt, any sense of fear, any sense of shame that you're experiencing for any kind of change in your religious life, we fully invite you to talk to our religious advisors. They're here to support you and to help you, not to shame you. And I think Angie is going to have some amazing things, very positive things to say in that regard. So without further ado, Angie, would you first like to tell us, since you represent paganism, how you would define it in your own words?
Sure, of course. Um, as with many other religions or spiritual paths, if you ask three people the definition of that path, you're going to get five different responses. But for me, in general, paganism is a path that's rooted in ancient European traditions that are built upon a foundation of respect and awareness for the sacredness of the earth and its cycles. It's comprised of a rich diversity of religious and spiritual traditions, but it's principally rooted in the indigenous traditions of pre-Christian Europe and its origins in the ancient nature religions.
I really like the phrase that you used, pre-Christian, because I think, especially in the United States, where people tend to have very Christian normative or Christian oriented perspectives, there's this idea that paganism means anti-Christian. Every belief that Christianity has, paganism is directly against it. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure, I'd love to. Actually, I have heard that before, but I think that it sort of it takes me right back to my childhood years. I was raised in a pagan family, and there was a tradition in my family that was imposed by my mother, and she used to take ordinary things like a bowl of salsa on the dining room table, and she would put it down, and she would say to my siblings and I, and what happened before that? And we would have to trace it all the way back to the guy that planted the seed that grew the tomato that got picked, that got put on the truck, that, you know, all the way to putting in the jar, putting on the grocery store. So, you know, tracing it all the way back to its beginning. And so when Christians tell us as pagans that we are the antithesis of what they are, I would encourage them to say, to take their religion back to what happened before that, because the majority of the roots of Christianity come from pagan traditions. So we can't be opposed to one another uh, because we are connected in that way.
Mm. Absolutely. And I love that exercise that your mom did. I'm gonna as a Buddhist perhaps embark upon that with my bowls of salsa. It's very centering and connecting to the world. Um, so we've defined paganism in perhaps the safest terms that we can. What values would you say? We've talked about the earth a little bit, but perhaps to expound on that. what values are central to paganism?
Well, I think that one of the things that is mostly encouraged for value is personal responsibility. Paganism is not a religion of the book. We don't have a charismatic prophet leader. I like to say we're non-prophet, prophet. Um, but uh, we encourage individual relationship between um, yourself and the divine. And I, in particular, am an animist, which means that I see the sacred divine in everything.
Mm.
So if you imagine a giant spider web, and each of us has a place on that web, and when anything moves, when any of us move, and that is anything, that's animal, that's plant, that's anything, moves, it causes a particular vibration across the web, and it can have a different impact on everyone else there. So I have to be responsible for the way that I move, for one thing, but I also need to understand that I am interconnected with everything, and can draw strength from that. So the values of defining who I am and how my life as a human impacts the world, including the environment and the earth, because my practice is based on the cycles of nature. So there's the rising and, well, first breath, and then there's the rising and setting of the sun and the phasing of the moon and the changing of the seasons, and then the last exhale, which is death. And that is the human experience. Um, Whatever it is that animates us during those two bookends, at that last exhale, it leaves and we cease to be human. So we all have that in common. The value of paganism is to be able to make sacred what happens between that first and final breath. And that means to have an understanding of the cycles of nature, and to be a part of it as opposed to a part from it.
Mm. That's so poetic. I love that so much. I want to backtrack slightly before we continue digging into this deep sense of kind of cosmic responsibility that you're talking about. Um, I was very interested in what you said about not having a charismatic leader, because as a woman, sometimes it can be disheartening looking at categories of religion as categories that are run by charismatic men, how women have kind of been denied that role in society historically. Um, what does that mean for paganism to not have that history of just charismatic male leadership, as far as femininity, especially feminism, is concerned?
That's a big question, and I'll do what I can to address it. It's a big question because uh, it's going to take me into a different spoke of the umbrella of paganism.
Okay.
And let me set that aside for just a minute. I think that, well, first of all, there are branches of paganism that interact with the deities of mythology. There's also a branch which includes goddesses.
Mm.
There's also a branch of paganism that is specifically geared toward goddess spirituality. And for me in particular, I view the earth as female in its traditional form of female,
Mm.
in that it constantly gives birth to itself. And we see that cycle over and over again, physically, tangibly, when we look outside, but it's also very, very prevalent in our mythologies. We look at the mythology of Demeter and Persephone, where Persephone, the daughter of Demeter is abducted, or in some versions of that story, she goes willingly as she comes into her maturation, her puberty. She begins menstruating. She goes willingly with Hades and to the underworld, and the woman of wisdom, who is Hecate, comes to broker the deal, as grandmothers often do, um, to come up with a bargain that she can come back and spend 6 months above with her mother, and then she returns to her husband, where it turns out that, you know, Persephone's thinking it's not so bad being the queen of the underworld. So so there's that whole story where females are empowered and they are magical, and you know, the whole birthing process of bringing another being into the world is sacred. And so women are very much empowered, which is one of the main attractions of paganism to women, is because, you know, women are revered and seen as sacred and equal. And there are many feisty women who refuse, either in their religious traditions or in their earthly walk, to be um, to be submissive in the ways that patriarchal monotheistic religions demand of their women.
Wonderful. So encouraging to hear. I guess perhaps to kind of combine sort of the social justice aspect of the feminism that we were just talking about, and the deep sense of responsibility that you were referring to earlier. How has paganism aged into the 21st century? When pagans are worshiping the way that they do, whatever that worship looks like, whatever their practice looks like, their values per se, what are the 21st century concerns?
Where do I start with this? I think that we have to understand that paganism is not, it's very loosely configured, in that there's not like one central body of leadership. It is more like multiple small groups of people that are getting together and doing things. Paganism had its revival in the 1960s, and that was via a branch of paganism called Wicca. Wicca is not an ancient religion. It is something that that has developed over time from its original sort of blast onto the surface through via Gerald Gardner and some others in the 60s. And it is by and large probably one of the largest branches of paganism, and the one that the most books have been written about, and it seems to have sort of taken over. But you know, I see Wicca as just another part of the cycle of paganism. And you know, there has been so much archaeological, anthropological research done on paganism that recently, that completely blows a lot of some of the older ideas out of the water. And you know, for example, and I hope I'm not going down the garden path too badly here, but for example, this my goodness, it's been a year now. I was in Italy a year ago, and one of the places that I went to was an archaeological dig site. And this dig site was, it was 3,000 years BCE. It was of Greek origin, so it had been there prior to the Romans coming into Italy. It was a cave and a natural spring that was designated as worship for Demeter and Persephone. And the purpose of the site, there was, like I said, a cave, but the purpose of the site, based on what the dig was turning up, was that it was a first blood rite. So it was menstrual related for mothers who brought their young girls there who had just had that rite of passage of having their first blood. And what was the most interesting about it was that it was still in use. So the idea that these systems of worship and honor and cycles of life are not, they're unbroken. And that's a really bold thing to say, because there have been an awful lot of scholars out there who have argued that there are no unbroken traditions. But we uncover new things every day. And so I think Wicca blew open the doorway for a lot of these scholars who are saying there's no unbroken tradition, because with Wicca, there is no unbroken tradition. It's new. But this opened the doorway for many other Reconstructionists who came in first trying to reconstruct the Roman, the Egyptian, the Celtic, pre-Christian traditions, and then ended up with enough information combined with new information to turn that reconstruction into deciphering. And so that's what's happening now is, I tongue in cheek, because I do a lot of work in the interfaith forums, I say everyone is born pagan. You come out of the womb, you take your first breath. That's the first sacred cycle. And then, as we said before, the rising and setting of the sun, phasing of the moon, everything comes after, is part of nature. It's the natural cycle. It happens. It's going to be your experience no matter what. But everything after those things is an overlay. It's something that you've been taught. And so as we move into the 21st century, I think that the larger issue is, how do we get people to return to the basics of who and what they are without an intermediary, so that they can have that personal experience with the planet that we live on and the shared experiences of that as human beings. We have lots of groups that are active in things like, we had a group show up at the pipeline sites. We've had them protesting water rights. We've had them protesting for deforestation. So we're pretty heavily involved in those things here in the 21st century, and in making sure that our politicians are on board with those issues. Right. So being green or ecologically friendly, that is our religion.
Yeah.
So and each of those gods and goddesses that people may narrow that scope down to, they also fit into that cycle. As do many of the gods of old, that dying, rising sun god that happens over and over and over again. That all can be traced back to the agricultural cycle of planting, plowing, planting, tending, harvesting, storing, fallow, start again. So right. I hope that answered your question.
Well, for sure, because I think at the center of kind of ecological responsibility, absolutely, that has exploded ever since the 21st century started. We're really getting to a point where I think, especially for young people who are realizing that they might not have the lives that they want, their children might not have the lives that they want, because our earth is dying. It's a very existential issue that ties so deeply into spirituality, and I really love the way that you're describing it um, about ecology being your religion, about this reverence and care for the earth, that is kind of one with your own existence. Because I agree, I think it's very hard for people to be in that very vulnerable and intimate space with their humanity. Um, so it's definitely a pressing issue, to say the least.
I think Greta Thunberg
Yes,
has,
yes.
has certainly brought attention to the house being on fire, and that's the way we need to react to it. I think that so many people have been, um, I don't know if programmed is the right word, but certainly indoctrinated to think that somebody else is going to take care of this, that, we're making too big of a deal of it. Um, but I don't know if you can make too big of a deal of it, because we've only got this one shot. And, no, we may not be responsible for all of the horrible things. Humanity may not be responsible completely for the melting polar caps, but we are contributing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have certainly contributed to the plastic in the oceans.
Mm-hmm.
That is unbelievably massive.
Mm-hmm.
And we are contributing to the death of wildlife, um, that contribute largely to the ecosystem by our horrific habits of polluting and our rather dismissive attitudes of, um, doing what's convenient for us versus what might be better for the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
So, while we encourage individual responsibility, there's a difference between that and individualism, which
Right,
makes, one person whatever's best for me, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
right, right. That really puts the balance in perspective. We are really living in a society that's driven by kind of the Ubermensch's purpose. My purpose in the world, what I want, trumps everything else. Um, so yeah, wonderful.
That is a survival tactic,
Oh, really?
and I think we really need to look at that. Some of that is the the survival instinct kicking in of someone whose needs are not being met, and they will do whatever it takes, to get their needs met. I think what we
Mm,
need to do is shine a light on what is it that you really need,
right.
so that we can discern, are you eating McDonald's hamburgers, um, as a steady diet to the detriment of your health and the planet, because that's all you can afford,
Mm,
you
yeah,
know, because that's a whole different set of values than the person that's doing it just because they don't care,
right.
and
Exactly.
it's convenience. And our whole society, our whole system here in the United States particularly, is based on this sort of disgust for the poor.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a mindset that needs to, or the people of color, or people that don't fit into the normative paradigm as defined by others. And there's also the golden rule idea, which we could do a whole nother talk show on that, but I am horrifically opposed to the golden rule, because what it does is it imposes what I want for you on you.
Mm,
It's do unto others, as you would have them do unto you. How about if we do unto others the way they tell us they need, and
right.
trust them, and let go of this, I'm going to oversee every drop I give you to make sure you're doing what I want you to do with it. We've got some really skewed ideas about, generosity and compassion in
Mm,
in our society today, um, and I think that these are root issues that need to be examined.
absolutely. Yeah. like you were saying, it sounds like our nature is, to put it your way, pagan, very united with the earth, very united with our humanity, but perhaps our nurture, for sure, our nurture is going in all kinds of different detrimental directions. Um, yeah, wow. There was something that I wanted to ask. I think it was about the golden rule. Do you ever feel, because responsibility is so important in paganism, do you ever feel like a certain amount of frustration? I feel like the issue with the golden rule problem, like you're saying, is just this lack of communication, this lack of community and intimacy with the people around you in your life, the people in your society. Um, how do you personally, or do people in your community um, deal with situations when responsibility isn't being taken, when that initiative isn't being taken and bad things are starting to happen because of it? Is there kind of general, I guess, pagan coping mechanism for that kind of thing?
I think that it would be depending, again, I can think of a million different scenarios that might happen in. I think that if it is in fact a community um, that has some cohesiveness, then the person that is not conducting themselves in a way that is acceptable would be confronted.
Mm-hmm.
And there, we are by no means perfect, and there are individuals within our community that are there for their own gratification, whether that's to make money or sexually or in other ways that are inappropriate to how we feel like we should move in the world.
Yeah.
And there are those who, have a need to take the spotlight as much as possible and make grandiose claims. And I mean, it's you're gonna, in any population, you're gonna have these individuals. But I think that that in the pagan community, as I have seen it, there is no reluctance to sort of spotlight that and ask for clarification, if nothing else.
Right. It sounds like reflexive to perhaps the preemptive individual responsibility is also a sense of community accountability, making sure that actions have consequences as they do in nature, really demonstrating if we have a community with shared values and you're violating those values, we're going to communicate about it, let you know.
And then you have the option of either finding a community that serves you better, or rethinking how you're moving through this one.
Right. Learning and growing from it. All right. So wonderful little kind of focus on modernity that we had there, which there's so much to unpack. To kind of focus on the uniqueness of being a young adult, especially being a young adult who's being independent for the first time, who say is in college and is learning so many new things for the first time in their life. I think I can speak to my first year in college. I went to public school, so it was kind of the American curriculum, the state curriculum of this is what our history is according to what these other people have determined that you need to know. So it's such a different environment going to college, which is often privately funded, not all the time, but having professors who are tenured and can just say whatever they want, critique whatever they want. There's so much exposure to new flavors of being human, new opinions, hot takes, all of those fun things. I guess to get to my question, how does paganism specifically appeal to the context and concerns of young adults?
Well, I think that it does, especially our young adults,
Mm,
seem to have a focus on social justice,
right.
inclusivity, the things that are important to those um, that era. And I also think that they many of them have their finger on the pulse of honoring their elders and respecting the wisdom of their elders. And there's a difference in our community between an elder and just being old. Um, and there's also the idea amongst the elders themselves of understanding. There comes a point in time where you come face to face with the concept of you must leave your era, you must never allow your era to leave you.
Mm,
We have been moving so fast as and growing so fast as a human species with technology and communications that it's really a struggle for folks to keep up, especially when you've been indoctrinated. And pagans are no different. We are all indoctrinated by the society and and our peers. And but when you've been indoctrinated to have something as an unshakable truth,
right.
and then somebody comes in and just blows it out of the water, and we realize that this is where the next generation is going.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I think that uh, there's this exchange of need. We don't I don't think that we develop through rites of passage, which I think paganism is great at, um, younger generations to engage in friendships
Mm-hmm.
with older generations, to have peer and mentoring relationships. Um, you know, we encourage our young women to engage with the different stages of women. From we have sort of a paradigm that we use that's not hard and fast, and it's fairly new, but it's maiden, mother, queen, and crone, and it follows the phasing of the moon.
That's fun.
Where it's a sliver of light, and then it's full, and then it's a waning sliver, and then it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the four stages of women. For men, it's squire, sire, king, and sage. And so those things have come together recently because there's a bigger gap now. We're living longer.
Right.
So the king and the queen stages, you're not their elders are still alive. And
Mm-hmm.
so to be able to tap into those people as resources, not only to sort of add to the thread of what happened before that, but to
Mm-hmm.
also try to understand that when my mom was a girl, they didn't have a microwave oven. They
Wow.
didn't even know what that was.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand that each person is a product of their era, and yet we're all, we've got young people who are outgrowing their childhood, coming into young adulthood, and the idea in society is that there's going to be this big rebellion, and there's going to be the generation gap, and all of that is true, but it doesn't have to be a war.
Yeah.
So there's information to be had, and the only way we're going to be able to make that change from the way things are tending to be now is with engagement. So I'm seeing a lot of nursing homes who are also incorporating daycare centers, and
Mhm.
nursing homes who are incorporating college dorms.
Right. I love that.
So, I think we need to start thinking of us as a genre, a species
Mhm.
of humans with different life experiences because of different longevities,
Mhm.
and use that information to help make us better people individually. So, I'm excited when my 15-year-old nephew can go program the cable box,
That's all they're there
so
for.
and I love having conversations with him, because
Yeah.
especially through this last political bout that we were in, he had some really
Mhm.
insightful commentary.
Oh,
So, um, I'm excited about how the future is coming up, and I'm excited about um, some of the folks in our communities who are having children and who are raising them,
mhm.
in these ways without fear of retribution or
Mhm.
or uh, being labeled a pariah or thrown out
Mhm.
of their families. Um,
Right.
I just think, and if I may, I want to circle back around to the idea of you know young adults who are in college who are finding new ways of living and having their ideas challenged and their long held beliefs challenged. Um,
Absolutely.
I would say to them, you don't have to let go of anything.
Mm.
You don't have to commit to anything to explore it. And explore it first and make your decisions after you've explored it about how you want to incorporate it and how far you want to incorporate it and how it feeds you. And um the idea, it's for me, paganism has a lot of similarities to
Mhm.
young adults that have had to come out as homosexual to their parents.
Mm.
They're afraid of judgment, and um and we want to be there to support and encourage, with the idea in mind that most parents really love their children.
Mhm.
And as we progress, the generation that today's college students are coming from is not the same level of judgmental, as the ones before that.
Right. We're
So,
cycling through.
yeah.
Sure. That brings me to my question about exploration, because I think if you don't have a point of reference for at all about paganism, I find that when people are learning about new religions, it's often because they meet someone who they're like, wow, this is a really amazing person. And the faith tradition that they belong to is not something that I'm familiar with at all, but they're making it sound pretty great. um, I know just from my experience as an American Buddhist, I know a lot of people um, are kind of timid about approaching Buddhism and other faiths in general that are not from the West, because they're afraid of appropriating, being respectful to the tradition, whitewashing things, all of the above. Um, Granted, paganism is a bit more closely associated with the West, but for someone who's not familiar with it at all, how would you recommend that they go about exploring it for the first time? Or what patterns have you seen in the past that tend to bode well?
um i I have a couple of different perspectives on that. It used to be that the bookshelves were filled with books that were not that great
Mhm.
about paganism. There was this rush to fill a need, and a lot of what was published was iffy at best.
Mm.
My um, When someone comes to me, uh, there are a couple of things. A lot of times, because of some of what Hollywood has produced. The impetus for someone coming to me is that they want to learn how to do magic, or they want to spell cast, or they want to do witchcraft, or that those big heavy words. And I think some of them get really disappointed with the responses about that. There are a couple of different things going on here. First of all, if someone wants to unpack paganism, they need to go to the academics to do it. They need to go to Dr. Michael York with pagan mysticism and pagan ethics. They need to take a big grain of salt and go choke down Ronald Hutton. And and they need to look at Maria Gavadas and some of the earlier mothers of the goddess spirituality movements, and look at some of the statuary and look at, what are your roots? Where did this come from? What happened before that? And you need to have that sort of foundation, I think, before you can just jump in the middle of the fray and start making it up as you go along. Although there are plenty of folks out there that have done that. And I just don't see the kind of depth for connection in the people that are, once again, just listening to what somebody else tells them rather than having their own experience. So that would be the first the academic part. Secondarily, let's talk about those heavy words, spellcasting and witchcraft. And, my response to that is, first of all, witchcraft does not belong to paganism. Witchcraft it's a practice. And in my opinion, it's practiced by every religion. So, and they don't really like to hear that. But when that group of boys gathers around that basketball goal and prays that before they play that game, either they're going to play their best game or they're going to win that game, what they are doing is it's an omission. The omission being what they really want is for the other team to lose. So witchcraft and magic is tapping into an external source to impact your will in your favor. Some communities call that prayer.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure based on what we've been talking about with responsibility, and just reflecting on how deep that goes when you're really up close and intimate with it. Surely enhancing the will has far more repercussions than we're certainly ready to deal with. So yeah, I guess to perhaps ask, if someone is to come in and be asking about magic, or think, I don't want to say anything that's wrong, so I don't want to equate magic with Wicca. But if someone is coming in looking for those things, looking for a way to exercise their will, is there usually a trend in what they're needing spiritually, that you've been able to track as an advisor, and kind of acknowledge over the years? Like, okay, what's really the meat of this request for finding ways of practicing magic? Is it a feeling of powerlessness? What have you kind of gleaned from that?
I think a lot of times it's desperation. It is someone who, has a love interest or a lot of love spells. Lots of people want love spells. Or it's a money spell. And, again, for when you fit personal responsibility into that, if you're doing a prosperity spell or a money spell, You don't just do this spell and then go home and sit in the Barca lounger and wait for the employers to knock on your door. You know, the personal responsibility of that is that you put out 1,000 resumes, you follow up on them, you follow the protocols that have been set forth in the business world for you to appeal to an employer. You can use shape shifting to turn into whatever it is that you need to present yourself in a way that is going to be met with reception. And there are an awful lot of folks out there that aren't willing to do any of that. So that's what I generally ask is, what's your goal here? And what have you done to meet that goal before you've come to this place of making this request? Now, healing requests can be a bit of a different story.
Right.
And again, I've had people come to me for their beloveds, and they want healing work done, and I can certainly put that kind of energy out across that web. But you have to go to the doctor, and you have to follow the medical plan, and you have to stop that behavior, that may be prohibiting you from getting better.
Right.
So, it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. Again, responsibility comes back into the fold. Perhaps even running from responsibility. Wow. Yeah.
Or refusing it.
Sorry. Go
Or
ahead.
refusing it.
Right. Right.
Refusing it. It's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. And claiming a status of victim as your identity. The victim needs to be heard, and whatever has been perpetrated against them needs to be addressed, and they need to be dealt with compassionately so that they can become stronger than what happened to them, and more than what happened to them.
Right. Right. Responsibility. The more that we keep discussing it, I'm realizing I think we can often look at responsibility in very bitter ways. But I think when we're looking at responsibility in the very human shades that it manifests in, it's so amorphous, so complex, and yet it's so deeply rooted in our existence. I think that's something from an interfaith perspective that we can relate to each other with. Because with Buddhism, sometimes those Four Noble Truths can be a real kick in the butt. Life is suffering. It has a cause. It has an end, and this is what you need to do to stop it. It's very cyclical, and I think it's very hard to face up to. Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting because I think that for me and mine, I hear an awful lot of people saying, we have to transcend life, we have to look beyond. But for me, I'm here to have the human experience, and that includes an array of things that are considered undesirable by a lot of the world's religions. Anger, for one, grief, joy, ecstasy. And I think that it's really important that, for pagans, we don't try to transcend that human experience. We have the full array of the human experience. And so we differ. And my basic view is that your mileage may vary. You do what feeds you,
Right.
and what taps into you, to make your heart sing, to make you feel that connection with something that is larger than yourself. That's what's important, because when you're in that space, there can be nothing other than love and compassion. And I think that that's actually through neurotheology that's been sort of proven as, the brain circuitry acts in with electrical impulses in a particular pattern when someone has reached a point where they feel they are in connection with something that's larger than themselves. And so um, we can experience that. The way that we get there may be different, which is why what we cannot do is take upon ourselves the responsibility of imposing what gets us there on someone else,
Right,
which is why we
exactly.
don't convert. We're not a proselytizing religion. We don't require conversion, especially since I say we're all born pagan anyway, but that's just a little mischievous arrogance.
Kind of that makes me think, because I think that our society is very tied to labels. We really like identifying ourselves, with our political parties, with our religious identities. And for some people, taking that step, say that I have been going through the academia for paganism and I have found a community for myself, and it's been however long, and I'm starting to really feel fulfilled and centered in that community. But that last piece of saying I'm a pagan or I'm a blank, whatever the like subgroup of pagan that I'm involved with is, that can be daunting. Um, Especially as a young person, where I think some people are afraid that they're gonna shift again and everyone's gonna notice, oh, she said she was a pagan, but now she's not. So interesting. Um, what kind of affirmations do you have for folks who might be kind of living with that self bully, the self identity bully, as far as taking that last step is concerned?
As far as being able to claim that they're pagan,
Yeah.
um, I think that it's kind of a split. Uh, it's a split idea. I'm not really sure. Um, I've seen it happen with a lot of people where they identify with much more uh, from this side of things than they do with their religion of origin, and it becomes. I think one of the first steps that I often see is a person will say, I'm not Catholic anymore, or I was raised Baptist, or I was raised um, Muslim, and I'm not that anymore. And I think, it's really important um, to not take that personally when someone says that,
Right.
um, that they have, and I feel like there's a bristling that happens, especially amongst the religious leaders, um, that can trickle down to parents.
Oh, definitely.
Suddenly there is this, this horrified acknowledgement that all of this time and that has gone into this child and this training, and that parent then has to face the idea that um, they are feeling somewhat betrayed,
Mm,
and the child has to face that they have caused um, this environment where their parents are receiving this as a betrayal. So I think it's important in those situations to educate before doing any big declarations,
mm.
um, and to never ever do anything that's going to put yourself in danger.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. Um, I was just going to say that kind of with the disappointment aspect, that can manifest in so many different ways. I know uh, I've had my own experiences, and I've had plenty of other people in my life who've had experiences where there can be a lot of backlash from the people around them, especially in ways where people are saying, well, if you're leaving this faith tradition, then surely you didn't read enough things in this faith tradition. You didn't go to the right congregation. You didn't have the proper leader. If we weren't the right people to train you, then perhaps there's someone else just still with our name who can train you. Um, I wonder if there's kind of like a grieving process that happens with that. Because I think as much as you might put faith in a certain institution to ground you, you really put faith in those people to ground you as well. So it really is a massively world rocking, growing experience when, those people are acting in ways you've never seen them act in before. Um, it, it's a new chapter in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think being acquainted with those behaviors, and with your own ability to go through that grieving process, cycle through it, become acquainted with the new you, which was really just you the whole time. It's a lot.
I think it's one step sideways
Right.
from where you are. So you're seeing this, you've got this faceted thing in the center. You take one step sideways, the light hits it differently, it changes color, and your perception completely changes. I was going to make a point with something that you said. I think that, again, there doesn't have to be this total abandonment. There are lots of folks that come to paganism that truly miss the regalia and ceremony, and ritual from their religions of origin, and it can be beautiful and very moving. Um, and I, as someone who was not raised in these traditions, my husband was raised Catholic, and he left Catholicism, but we still thoroughly enjoy a Christmas Eve service. The music is lovely. The ambiance, just the energy of the room, of people coming in to celebrate this particular holiday. I, speaking for myself only, I celebrate the winter solstice. So, it is the birth of the sun, S-U-N. And Christianity at Christmas celebrates the birth of the sun, S-O-N. So the life of Jesus being that dying, rising, born of divinity, dying, rising sun god, fits my paradigm okay. It takes some of what's intangible in my own practice and makes it tangible, gives it substance. So I get a lot out of that.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that I have to be Catholic or whomever or whatever it is that we're doing.
Exactly.
So I don't see any disrespect in appreciating someone else's spiritual environment without claiming it, and that runs both ways.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, because I do think we apply a lot of unneeded pressure to ourselves to not reside in gray areas, especially like I was saying with the labels before. People get troubled for whatever reason when they're not completely Catholic per se, completely pagan per se. But I agree. I think that's a very enriching experience because, religion aside, things like Christmas, they're cultural events. There's community involved, and like you said, there's so much beauty in cultural events like that. Um, yeah, we wouldn't be human, I think, if we constantly denied ourselves the ability to feel joy of what other humans have done with their lives and with our earth. So Yeah, that feels like a good note to end on, and unless you have any other kind of final thoughts.
I guess, yeah, I do kind of want to summarize by saying that, you know, whatever it is that I've said here today, it's not chiseled in concrete. It
Mm.
doesn't speak for everyone. It's just been kind of a stream of consciousness, um, and food for thought. Just I'm here. I'm open for questions, for conversations. Um, I can't wait till we can get back on campus again, and
Yeah.
you know, I can have office hours and that sort of thing. But there is there is beauty in honor and respect,
Mm.
um, and compassion, and you know, there's not enough beauty in the world with regard to our current states of affairs. And I think that um, knowing about each other's traditions and dispelling misconceptions
Mm.
about each other's traditions, um, the whole devil worship piece, which is not of paganism.
Right.
Um, you know, Satan is a Christian construct. He belongs to the Abrahamic faith. We don't know him. You know, the whole idea of sacrificing house pets, you know, that's another big one. Doesn't happen. We love our house pets. And,
Yeah, that
and
is
some of
good.
us have far too many of them. But, you know, there are so many misconceptions, and Hollywood has contributed to that.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so many conversations to be had about it that are fun and substantial and enlightening. And I love having them. So thank you for allowing me this time. Um, and I just hope that whoever ends up watching this, that they'll reach out if they have questions or concerns, or even if I said something that made them prickle, you know, I'm
Mm,
happy to have that conversation.
absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. You're welcome. And I'll see you on campus.
Yeah, hopefully sometime soon.